Hello again. This is Satan's Trilogy. It is Book 2, Chapter 2, and this will be reading 58. I am the author and the narrator. Please sit back, relax, and let the story unfold. Breakfast was fantastic as usual. The girls all lounged around the apartment for a short while and then left to go their separate ways. Brandy left for work with a box of lunch from Esther. Day and Esther quickly dressed to join their father at the grocery store. Day would watch the store as Esther and their father went to the bank to secure a loan. Esther and her father spoke about the store on the way to the bank. Esther wanted a clear understanding of what her father would like to see developed in the new addition. Esther also asked her father to allow her cousins return as minimum wage workers, helping to prepare the new addition. Mr. Hull laughed at the thought and agreed. Then Esther asked if they could also hire her friend John and his friends. She trusted them and knew they needed the work. Mr. Hull looked at Esther and chuckled and said, "Esther, if, as you say, we get this loan, I will hire anyone you ask me to. But we'll need to open the new edition as quickly as possible to keep the books balanced." Esther leaned over across her seat and gave her father a kiss on the cheek, then said, "Thank you, Father. These young men will work hard for you, and the new edition will open quickly." Mr. Hull pulled up to the Chicago Commerce Bank and parked the car close to the front door. Entering the bank, Esther and her father were greeted by the loan manager, Mr. Thomas. He quickly walked up to the two of them and extended his hand. "Good morning, Mr. Hull. And, of course, this is your daughter, Esther. Welcome back to our bank. I have arranged to have your loan request prepared and ready in my office. Please follow me." Mr. Thomas led the way to a small but attractive office where he asked Esther and Mr. Hull to take a seat. He quickly sat behind a desk and started to shuffle through some papers. Mr. Thomas studied the papers and looked up at Mr. Hull, then said, "We have accepted your application for the loan and have extended the line of credit to $1.8 million. We felt that the good you will be bringing to the community in jobs and services deserves our full support." Mr. Thomas seemed excited. "With your approval, we would like to post a sign outside of your new addition that your expansion is financed by Chicago Commerce Bank. I hope that will not be offensive to you." Mr. Hull looked at Mr. Thomas, whom he had never met before, though he had applied for a loan from the bank on 3 different occasions. And then he looked at Esther and realized that his daughter had some influence on the bank, and for this reason, he would finally see his dream of expanding the store come true. Again looking at Mr. Thomas, Mr. Hull said, "Of course not, as long as you keep the sign a reasonable size." After signing papers and the usual handshaking, Esther and her father walked out of the bank with Mr. Hull receiving a $1.8 million credit line. Once in the car, Mr. Hull turned slightly to Esther and asked, Tell me, daughter, why is it after so many applications for a loan, I finally have one?" Esther smiled at her father and said, "When I came to this country, I had just lost my birth father. He left me financially well off. Last week, I placed a large amount of money into the Chicago Commerce Bank with the agreement that they would help finance small businesses in the area that help to serve the community. Mr. Thomas' agenda is now a different one, and I believe that he is in agreement with it." Mr. Ho smiled with a large amount of pride, said to Esther, "I am so proud of my daughter for showing so much wisdom. I am proud beyond my ability to express myself." Esther listened to her father while their conversation had extended through the entire trip. As Mr. Ho pulled into the store's parking lot, Esther said to her father, "Family and friends are what is truly important in life. Without them, we have nothing." Esther smiled at her father. Once out of the car, Esther looked at Mr. Ho and commented, "Well, Father, we have 6 hard-working young men that will report today for work assignments. The property next door is ours at a very reasonable price. I had my cousin Chen contact the owner and arrange a very good price for us." Esther smiled. "The Chinese community tries very hard to support one another. We can begin our cleanup of the site today, and we can sign for the property tomorrow. The price is only $300,000. Mr. Ho for a moment was stunned and then chuckled. "Esther, you are wonderful. You have thought of everything." Mr. Ho smiled at Esther. "That is a much better price than offered me years ago, when I first started to dream of this expansion." Esther and her father had arrived at the grocery store in less than 6 minutes. The bank was very close and traffic was light. Day was working the front checkout and greeted Esther and her father as they entered the store. "You're back. So how did it go?" asked Day. Mr. Ho responded, "We have everything that we need. We'll soon have 3 times the floor space and hopefully 3 times the customers." Mr. Ho smiled at Day and gave her a hug as she came running to him. Wearing her knee-length black leather boots with a short black skirt, Day had remained true to the store's dress code and was wearing her black smock. Day's father didn't question the clothing worn by others. He had seen all extremes and tried to only look at the person. For this reason, he had agreed to hiring the 3 Chinese men that had tried to rob the store. Mr. Ho saw goodness in each of them, and of course, he was also relying on Esther's judgment, which seldom, if ever, was wrong. Hugging Day and sharing his excitement with her, Mr. Ho asked both girls to the checkout counter, where he pulled out a large portfolio from under the counter. Smiling at Esther, Mr. Ho said, "Like you, Esther, I have a cousin that has provided us with the store's expansion plan. He is a building engineer." Day and Esther looked at the prints and quickly saw the future floor plan of the grocery store. It all made sense. The wall separating the 2 stores would be torn down. It was only a wooden partition, and then the far wall would hold fresh vegetables. The back wall would have a large dedicated area for milk and products, and the rest of it would be used for preparation of various meats. The store would now have a dedicated section for meats and seafood. Day and Esther looked at each other and smiled. Each understood that this was a great floor plan, and would create a tremendous store for the neighborhood. Esther turned to her father and said, "Father, I have arranged for several large dumpsters to be left behind the store for the discarded materials from our expansion. Do you wish for me to oversee the teardown of the expansion space, or would you like to take charge of this?" Mr. Ho smiled and quickly responded, "I want to be involved in all parts of the expansion. I know that you and Day, with Raven and Riley Grace, can run the everyday demands of this store, and of course, I'll be close by for questions." So Esther and her sister took care of running the store in the evenings, along with Raven and Riley Grace, and Mr. Ho worked with his 6 new workers in the expansion of the store. The expansion progressed quickly. The electricians had come and gone, along with the plumbers. Mr. Ho was waiting for the new refrigerator units to be installed. Within a matter of days, the store would have had its grand opening. Seldom had any project ever come together this quickly. The week had progressed quickly. By Friday, Day and Esther had just finished stocking the new fresh produce display, along with filling the 6 new rows of shelves. Esther turned to Raven and said, "Day, please stay just a bit longer while I go outside and investigate something." Esther was speaking without any real expression, and Day thought little of it. Responding to Esther, "Of course, Esther. I'll be here until you get back." Esther had noticed for several days someone sitting in a parked car, watching the store. Esther's curiosity had been aroused, and so she decided to question the person inside of the car. Esther had no problem walking up from behind the car and pulling the door open. She promptly started to drill the person behind the steering wheel. Esther stood inside of the open driver's door and alongside the person behind the wheel. Speaking quickly, Esther asked, "Why are you watching the store?" The driver appeared startled and scared and quickly responded, "Please, I'm only watching. I mean no harm." Esther asked, "What are you watching?" The rather old man responded, "I'm watching you. I was hired to watch you, Esther Saint." Quickly assessing the man, his clothes, and the contents of the car, Esther realized that he was a private detective for hire. There were no weapons in the car or on his person. Esther saw absolutely no threat from this person and took a step backwards while closing his car door. Esther smiled at him as she knelt slightly, then said, "Here's hot coffee and a restroom inside, should you ever need one or the other." Esther turned and walked across the street to the store. Entering the store, Esther smiled at Day as she approached the checkout counter. Day asked, "Is there a problem?" Esther quickly responded, "I am being watched by a private detective from across the street. He is a harmless older man. I offered him use of our restroom and coffee if he needs them." Day looked puzzled, then appearing to switch her thoughts, and asked, "Esther, who and why would someone want you watched?" Esther was putting her smock back on and responded, "I think the who is Mr. Wilson, and the why is a good question. Perhaps I'll need to research Mr. Wilson some more." Esther glanced at the W.O.W. poster on the wall close by. Esther felt there was a connection, but she couldn't explain it. Not yet. The door opened and Mr. Ho walked in. He looked dusty and tired. Smiling at his 2 daughters, he commented, "We have 6 hard-working young men helping us. I am pleased with all of them. We have finished stocking and organizing the storeroom tonight. Esther, we filled both dumpsters behind the store. Can you arrange to have the empties removed?" One more time, I think we are done with them. Esther quickly responded, My cousin promised to check the dumpsters daily and to leave empties when needed. Esther smiled, for at that moment they all could hear a truck behind the store pulling the dumpsters up. Wow, said Esther, they are always on the mark. Mr. Hull said, Please allow me to go into the back of the store and clean up. Then you girls can go. Tomorrow is a school day. Mr. Hull understood that both of his daughters needed a little sleep, but he still preferred they not work late on a school night. Offering a suggestion, he said, Perhaps you two could do something relaxing the rest of the night. And so after Mr. Hull cleaned up, and after the girls said good night, they both sped off to Esther's apartment. They arrived at the same time. Esther parked her Ninja at the front edge of her parking space, and Day pulled in, parking the Mustang in front of the Ninja motorcycle. The girls entered the apartment and grabbed 2 bottles of water. Esther took a drink and walked down the hallway to see if Aunt Brandy was home yet. Laying on the bed, Aunt Brandy was in a deep sleep, her covers pulled over her and breathing rather heavily. Esther and Day both peeked into the bedroom, then quietly closed the door. Day sat on the edge of the couch, looked at Esther, and said, Well, I am good for about 3 more hours if you have something in mind. Esther smiled and said, How's your German? They quickly responded in German, This is my 4th year of German in school. I can hold my own. Esther smiled. I have 2 German friends that I am going to visit tonight. I told them my sister might be with me, and they were excited to see you again. They chuckled, and in German said, I might surprise them. Esther quickly jumped up. Well, if we only have 3 hours, we should hurry. Esther drove the Mustang, and in less than 30 minutes she was pulling the Mustang into the Bueller Brothers' drive. Esther stopped at the keypad entry box and entered a 6-digit code that opened the gates. Esther drove through, and Day made a comment. Esther, you know their gate code? Esther smiled at Day. Axel has become a very close friend of mine. He knows that no one can get the code from me, and he trusts me. He calls me his little saint. Esther and Day looked at each other and then both laughed out loud. They giggled for a few moments and then tried to compose themselves as Esther parked the Mustang in front of the German brothers' home. Esther quickly composed herself, then said to Day, I truly love Axel. He and I have both suffered a personal loss that challenges us to go on. Axel's brother Otto has become a close friend. He is a very strong man and wants only to live a peaceful life with his brother. You will see what I mean. Stepping out of the car, the girls were greeted by 3 security guards. One of them approached the girls and said, Esther, it is good to see you again. Who is this? Esther smiled at the large and stocky man. Hi, Brad. This is my sister, Day. It's her 2nd time here. Esther looked at Brad and grinned. My sister speaks a little German, so be careful what you say. Brad laughed and in German said, Speaking a little German is like having a little beer. It is never enough. Day followed Esther up the stairs and turned to Brad as she passed him, commenting to him in German, You are a very wise man. Brad laughed. Suddenly he realized that Esther and Day were really sisters. The front steps were of Italian white marble, said to be from the same quarry that Michelangelo found his marble for the Pieta. The house had a lot of old-world charm from Italy that is fitting for a time of opulence. As they reached the porch and front door of the large house, the front door quickly swung open and Axel was rushing forward to greet Esther. "My little saint, you made it, and you brought your sister. This is so wonderful. Now we can share stories." Axel laughed a hard laugh, for he was feeling wonderful and had amused himself. "I have a special surprise for you tonight. From our dinner, my brother saved a German sandwich for you. I think that it is large enough for the both of you." Axel had turned today, holding onto Esther with his long left arm and around her shoulders. Esther laughed at Axel. "If we eat now, we'll have to exercise extra hard tomorrow to burn off the calories." Axel laughed. "After you take one bite, you will be more than willing to pay any price for this sandwich." Axel looked at the girls. "Besides, the two of you could possibly use an extra pound or two. You're both so thin." Esther and Dave tried not to laugh, and they resisted the temptation to look at each other. Instead, they listened to Axel. Esther responded first. "Now you have my curiosity. You know that I want to be a chef, and if this sandwich is that good, I'll try my best to duplicate it." Esther gave Axel a kiss on the cheek as they entered the living room. They commented, "I can eat at any time of the day, and if this sandwich is that good, I'll gladly run that extra mile tomorrow." They chuckled. "I love great food." The room had a very high ceiling, filled with stuffed sofas and a large fireplace that had a wood-burning fire blazing inside the hearth. Esther sat down on the corner of a long sofa. She could feel the warmth from the fireplace on her right cheek. Day sat alongside of her, but didn't crowd Esther. The sofa was at least 9 feet long, and Day gave Esther a couple of feet distance to relax on the sofa. Axel sat on a facing sofa and immediately started with some questions. "So Esther, there is always something interesting going on in your life. Tell me all about it, and please don't leave anything out." Esther laughed and said, "Axel, you are so right. My life is full of excitement and sometimes a bit of danger. Several days ago, several young men came into my father's store with the intent of robbing him. I am embarrassed to say that they were several of my cousins." Esther laughed and added, "Chinese families are really large and very close. I have many cousins." Esther paused and continued, "They have since apologized and have agreed to work for my father as part of their penance. Our father told us tonight that they are hard workers." Esther said proudly, "They are really good young men that made one bad decision." Esther seemed to drift off for a moment. "We all make decisions that we regret." Axel listened intensely, then said, "That is amazing. They tried to rob your father, and now you have them working for him." Axel seemed a bit amazed. Esther pricked up a bit. "Our father is expanding the store into the building next door. We'll have 6 times the floor space. Hopefully, our neighborhood will support us, and we can hire additional help. I think this is a positive action for our dad and the neighborhood. We are really excited." Esther sat back, moved forward on the couch as she told the news. Axel looked at Esther and smiled. "You're always doing good." Axel was nodding in approval. "I wish that I had done more good as a young man." Esther quickly spoke up. "There is no shame in living a good life and a simple life. If we all did that, the world would be a truly better place." Esther was smiling at Axel in a loving way. Axel smiled and turned to Day. "So tell me a little bit about yourself." I can see that you and Esther are sisters. I mean that in a very honest way. It is obvious you both have each other's back." Axel smiled. They liked Axel, and the fact that Esther really liked him spoke volumes for his character. Esther never misjudged people. She could size a person up at a glance and was always dead on. They responded to Axel. "Esther and I are very much alike. We need little sleep, and learning comes easy to us. My father liked Esther before I even met her. That gave me a clue that she was special, for my father is able to see people as they really are, in the same way Esther does." They paused, smiled at Axel, and continued, "And of course, Esther saved my life, and no one has ever stepped up to rescue me in the way Esther did, and I mean without any hesitation. That is when I took Esther as my sister, and she graciously accepted me into her life." Axel, slightly stunned at Day's short and candid details of herself and Esther, paused, then asked, "Go back farther for me. Were you born here in the States? Do you have other siblings? And tell me about your parents, if you don't mind." Day laughed. "Axel, I apologize. I was trying to explain my relationship with Esther, and you really wanted to know more about me." Day smiled apologetically. "My dad arrived here 19 years ago. He had fled from North Korea with my mother. I was born shortly after their arrival. My mother died when I was only 2 years old, and my father has raised me on his own. I am told my mother was very smart, and perhaps that is where I get my intelligence." They looked down. "Esther and I share the loss of our mothers. Perhaps that is what helps to cement our sisterhood." Day's eyes were tearing slightly, but quickly dismissed her sadness and smiled. "Esther is Chinese, and I am Korean, yet we are sisters. Life sometimes is surprisingly wonderful." Day smiled and quickly leaned over to Esther and gave her a kiss on the cheek, and Esther smiled with a sister's love towards Day. So I think I'll stop there. That was reading 58. I hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, please take care and be safe.